Okay, so I probably won't be doing this for every country going forward, but Poland-Lithuania's story was just too big for one episode, especially since it really didn't end when the Commonwealth itself did. So let's get back to it. After the Third Partition, many Commonwealth soldiers, especially Poles, fled to revolutionary France, where they were welcomed by Napoleon, who allowed them to form the so-called Polish legions that later served alongside the French army. Their ranks grew rapidly as tens of thousands migrated from the east. France's constitution, however, did not allow foreign troops on her soil, and the Polish legions therefore were primarily used outside the country. And here lies a big historical irony. While these soldiers, many of them simple peasants, fought in hopes of one day liberating their homeland, something Napoleon seemed to kinda maybe support, they often were used by the French in doing the exact opposite elsewhere in the world. In 1802, for instance, the Polish legions were sent abroad to help put down the Haitian rebellion then occurring in the French West Indies. The campaign was a complete disaster, with thousands of legionnaires dying from tropical diseases like yellow fever before any fighting even occurred. What's more, the Poles openly questioned their purpose in defending France's overseas colonial holdings from a people who desired their own freedom. This didn't really win any favor with Napoleon, and things only got worse after he found out around 150 legionnaires had deserted to join the rebel cause. A little bit of a side note here, but there is actually a sizable community of people with Polish ancestry in Haiti today. Known as La Polonia, these are the ancestors of the original legionnaires who were sent over by Napoleon and later defected and joined the Haitian rebels. Polish Haitians, despite their relatively small size in relation to the overall population, have played a rather interesting role throughout the country's history. And in 1983, Pope John Paul II visited Haiti and acknowledged how Polish people had contributed to the country's eventual independence. Back in Europe, mistrust between the two sides continued to grow after Napoleon backed off supporting full Polish independence, something he, let's be honest, never had really committed to, and instead he created a satellite state, the Duchy of Warsaw, as his troops continued their push eastwards during the Napoleonic Wars. Still, a majority of the Commonwealth's former citizens, most notably the Poles, supported the French cause, and many joined in Napoleon's invasion of Russia. We all know how that went. Following the French retreat, the duchy was occupied again and, in 1815, partitioned again. But the Commonwealth, it just would not stay down. Ideas like Intermarium, which literally means between the seas, were debated among intellectuals and statesmen in exile. This project, an idealist revisioning of Poland-Lithuania, called for the creation of one massive federal state, stretching from Finland in the north all the way to the Balkans in the south. It never came anywhere close to realization, but continued to be championed by so-called Prometheans after World War I, who focused on dismantling the Russian Empire and its successor state, the Soviet Union. On that note, Russian occupation was really unpopular in the former Commonwealth. Secret police regularly detained suspected nationalists, freedom of the press was suspended indefinitely, and rumors began to spread that Polish troops would be used in suppressing France's July Revolution, or possibly the Belgian Revolution. In the years following the Congress of Vienna, St. Petersburg had also replaced nearly all ethnic Poles in administrative positions with Russians, while the Tsar would later crown himself King of Poland. This obviously wasn't looked upon that favorably in Poland. And the first uprising began in 1830 when Polish officers in Warsaw revolted, seizing a local garrison. It quickly spread to Lithuania, Belarus, and right bank Ukraine, the territory west of the Dnieper River. Memories of the Commonwealth still ran deep for many outside Poland. This included Countess Emilia Platter, a 25-year-old Lithuanian noblewoman, later known as the Lithuanian Joan of Arc. She raised a small unit and fought alongside Polish insurgents, eventually receiving the rank of captain. However, while her military exploits captivated many, and the plight of the Poles garnered sympathy in Western Europe, that only went so far, and the uprising was eventually crushed when 115,000 Russian forces crossed the border. The Countess, who never surrendered, eventually died of illness. What little, and it wasn't much, autonomy that the region had before the revolt was now lost. Although, it should be mentioned that about 20,000 Poles crossed into Prussia to surrender, rather than submitting to Russian rule. And while the November Uprising failed in its larger goals, it did mark the beginning of something like a generational rebellion, because, much to the frustration of St. Petersburg, every decade or so, the torch was passed to a new generation who took up the call to restore the lost Commonwealth. Another uprising in January 1863 lasted over 2 years before Russia was fully able to reassert its control. In the aftermath of the January Uprising, a period known as the Decades of Reprisals occurred, during which Russian officials executed hundreds of suspected Polish nationalists, and somewhere in the range of about 70,000 people were either imprisoned and/or sent to remote regions of Russia, such as Siberia. Thousands of estates in Poland and Lithuania were confiscated by the Russian government, and various taxes were imposed on others as part of war reparations. Russian became the official language and was to be taught exclusively in schools, while church estates and funds were seized by the government, and some monasteries and convents were abolished as well. And while all this was occurring, the Polish diaspora began to shape a new community outside Poland itself, Polonia. Composed of nearly 20 million people today, it was a significant force then for keeping the Polish question on the minds of world leaders. This eventually resulted in the Second Polish Republic being established after World War I, and through a similar process, Lithuania managed to regain its own independence from Russia. History, however, still loomed large over the two newly independent nations, and a brief war in 1919 saw the creation of the Republic of Central Lithuania, based in Vilnius, when the rest of Lithuania refused to enter into a new Polish-Lithuanian Union. Considered a puppet state by the Republic of Lithuania, it was later annexed by Poland following disputed elections in 1922. The borders of the two states would change yet again following World War II, roughly corresponding with today's Poland and Lithuania, given a few minor changes here and there, thus effectively marking the end of the Commonwealth's story. But even though it is gone as a geopolitical entity, the Commonwealth's legacy still continues to impact the people of Eastern Europe. Independent countries such as Poland, Lithuania, Belarus, the Baltics, and others do have historical connections to the Commonwealth, and this continues to impact not just their national identity, but how they look at themselves within the region and in association with the rest of Europe. This is perhaps best demonstrated through the exchange of people and a shared cultural history. And I'm trying to find the right word to describe it, but it's a very interesting process where you have many different nations who do look at themselves as distinct, but you still have something that is shared. When I was traveling throughout Belarus, when I was in Minsk, when I was in Brest, you'll see statues and memorials dedicated to heroes from the Commonwealth who are now very much considered part of Belarusian identity. And the same thing occurs across the border in Poland, in Lithuania, and elsewhere. Of course, you also have the literal exchange of people, in that you have a number of Polish settlers who, back in the Commonwealth's time, went over into what is now Ukraine, and many of those families continue to exist, and while their historic roots are in Poland, they are very much Ukrainians today, and that's just one example. You can find this all throughout Eastern Europe. Anyway, thanks again for listening. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, please feel free to like, subscribe, and I'll see you again next time. Peace.